Welcome everyone. I see we have some old friends on here and lots of new friends. We'll get started here in just a second, but I want to make sure that everybody got the download. So there's a download that accompanies this that you should have gotten upon registration. If you didn't receive that, then please send an email to sales@smallbizthoughts.com and we will go ahead and send it out to you. It's not necessary for this webinar, but it's just a list of some standard operating procedure processes and procedures that you might want to create, and then kind of a worksheet that you can go through to help motivate yourself to figure out, okay, what's the thing I want to do first and what's the thing I want to do second. So it's kind of a worksheet and a list of some processes and procedures. So we have lots of people registered for this call today, so I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of the questions. So down below is an opportunity for you to put in any of your questions that you have, and I'll go ahead and answer those by email. And also some questions I'm probably, in addition to answering you directly, I will use them for fodder on my blog, which I tend to do. So I always sort of feel like if I have a number of people who are interested in something, then instead of just doing it once, I'll put it out there for lots of people, because lots of people have the same kinds of questions. So today's topic is standard operating procedures for managed services, and we're going to cover the basics. For those of you who have not met me, my name is Carl Polachuk, and I am a managed service provider. I have been providing IT consulting for over 20 years. I'm the author of 15 books, including the Managed Services Operations Manual, which is a 4-volume set, and Managed Services in a Month, which has been the #1 book for managed services on Amazon for more than 6 years, and Service Agreements for SMB Consultants, a quick start guide to managed services. So if you go to our site, which is SMB Books, or Small Biz Thoughts, you'll find all of these books. And of course, they're all available on Amazon, and I'd be very happy if you would give them a look. So let's start with the basics: managed services and standard operating procedures. So managed services, basically, if you're not familiar with that term, that's kind of the modern way that we deliver technology consulting in the 21st century. It means that we use remote tools to monitor systems, apply patches, fixes, and updates, connect remotely into systems and manage them. It means that we do preventive maintenance, and our emphasis is on keeping problems from happening instead of waiting until something breaks and then we fix it. So the old model is break, fix. Now, in terms of SOPs, there are some SOPs, some standard operating procedures, that are different from other kinds of businesses. You know, the SOPs that you need to be successful for managed services are very specific. And so for us, in terms of this discussion, standard operating procedures are fairly self-explanatory, although what they really are is these are things that you can do to standardize the way that you deliver your service. And I hope at the end of this, half hour or so webinar, that you will have a really great idea about how SOPs can make your business dramatically more efficient and dramatically more profitable. As a bit of a side note, I highly encourage you to read The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. This is one of the truly great books for small business owners. Gerber talks about businesses that succeed and businesses that don't, and tries to look for patterns of what do we see in businesses that never go out of business? What do they have in common? And I was lucky enough very early on, in 1995, I read this book as I was preparing to open my first consulting business. And I am so grateful that I did, because it really showed me the importance of documenting every single process and procedure that I had. Interestingly, I had just finished 3 years at a company where one of my primary jobs was to get everybody to document everything they did. So that they could leave the business in good hands no matter what was going on. And it wasn't then going to be reliant upon one or two people. When I came to that job, nobody had documented anything, and they'd been in business for 15 years. And so people had to just, by word of mouth, train each other how to do things. And I just decided that's absolutely not going to happen. So I'd learned from personal experience how to document processes and procedures. And then I read this book, which took it to the next level. So I highly encourage you. This book is widely available for $10 or less. I mean, it's just everywhere. So read that book. It will change your business by next Monday, I promise. And also a note, you're going to see the word branding a great deal in the next half hour, because I want you to understand that the way that you do business is different from the way I do business. The way that you do it, I don't want anybody to take my processes and procedures, photocopy them, and pretend like it's their business. I want you to use it as a fodder, as a place to start, as a way to get going, because your business depends entirely on the way that you operate, the way that your company operates, and that's your brand. You know, some people say, well, you know, we're big on cleanliness, we're big on documentation, we're big on whatever it might be. And so when we leave a client's office, we want them to have a certain vision about what they just experienced with our tech support. And we can define that before we show up. We can say there's a way that we do this. There's a way we dress. There's a way that we talk. There's a way that we fill out paperwork. There's a way that we document. There's all kinds of things that we do that truly define who we are as a business. And that's branding. I mean, that is absolutely showing your brand to your clients. And I'll say this again, but let me just put it out there. If you hire people who are really good at what they do, and you let them do whatever they want, they will provide excellent customer service to your clients, but they will not build your brand. You need to pick people who are really good at what they do and then show them how to do it your way, knowing that they will bring their own intelligence and their own abilities to that job, but they will still do it your way. So let's look at a couple of definitions here. First of all, at the biggest level, a big above beyond this screen are policies. And policies are the philosophies that run your business. So for example, one of our policies is that we get prepaid for everything. Okay. Now, we have processes and procedures in place to make sure that that happens, but the policy is the biggie, right? There's a policy that we minimize downtime when we do migrations. There's a policy for all of these things at a much higher level. So that's beyond the scope of this. You should have policies. You should have a way that you do things. You should have a vision about what your company looks like to the outside world. Then we get into processes, procedures, and checklists. And the process is a name given to a series of tasks that result in a general outcome. So, for example, you have a process for migrating users to cloud services, right? So that's the biggie. That's the process is a migration process for taking clients to the cloud, okay? Or setting up a new office, or setting up a new computer, or setting up a firewall, right? You've got processes for those things. And then you've got procedures. So every process has at least one procedure, and it can have more than one. So let's say that your process is the migration process for the cloud. You will have a procedure for moving email, right? You'll have a procedure for exporting email from the old system. You'll have a procedure for importing email into the new system. You might combine those into one procedure that is moving email. You will have a procedure for backing up their data to the cloud. You will have a procedure for moving Active Directory, whatever it might be. You've got all of these procedures which together constitute your process. You need to think in terms of procedures because it helps you divide the job into manageable chunks. If you're using a project management tool, or if you're using a professional services automation tool that allows you to create tickets, you can use their project module, or you can just use the ticketing system to create one ticket for each procedure. So for example, a migration process might have 6 tickets. And the 6 tickets would be the primary procedures that you go through in order to fulfill that migration. So once you begin to divide it up, then you can say, okay, every procedure has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the worst thing for clients is when these things never have an end. Projects that go on forever and ever and ever kill your profitability and your customer relationship. So think in terms of, how do we define procedures that have a beginning, a middle, and an end? And when we are done with the procedure, we can close that ticket and we can move on and go on to the next procedure. And then finally, you have a checklist, and the checklist is the finest level of detail for executing the action steps. Every procedure will have at least one checklist and may have more than one checklist. So if you've got a procedure for moving email, you're going to have a checklist that includes making sure you know all of the users and all of the devices that they use. And you're going to export the email over here, and you're going to import the email over there, and then you're going to set them up on all of their devices, and you're going to test it all, and you're going to make sure it's all done. And when you go through that detailed checklist on the first user, you then cycle back, make any changes that are necessary, then you can photocopy it and use it for the next user and the next user and the next user. You should have a checklist for setting up new PCs. You should have a checklist for your monthly maintenance procedures, so forth and so on. So you should have lots and lots of checklists. And sometimes a checklist is half a page long and includes 5 items. And sometimes a checklist is 30 pages long and includes hundreds of items. As a general rule, we have a more or less 3-page checklist for setting up a new computer. And the reason for that is we want them all to be set up exactly the same. So when you get a new client, you take a generic new PC checklist and you set it up, and then you change it for that client. Oh, make sure that we map, they use an S drive here, okay, and then everybody's got a scan folder specifically within the S drive. So when you set up a new user, you have to make sure you set it up on the scanner and on the PC so that they can scan directly to their folder, right? Those are the kinds of things you put in that checklist, and then you'll never forget them. And if they use PDF Complete instead of Adobe Acrobat, then you have to have in your checklist, remove Adobe Acrobat or the sample software that ships with the computer and install PDF Complete. And those files are located here, and this is where you find the licenses, right? It's all in the checklist. And that allows 2 things. First of all, it allows complete consistency from one machine to the next. And second, it allows you to push that work down to technicians who are not so high level. You know, everyone listening to this podcast, to this webinar, can set up a new PC and everything will work and it'll be great. But every once in a while, you'll forget to install Adobe Acrobat, and then you're driving away from the client and they can't print and they don't have Adobe Acrobat, and you got to go back and you got to set it up, or you have to remote in and set it up, or you forgot to install the remote access system or whatever, right? Little bitty things can slip through the cracks, and all those little bitty things cost you money. But if you have a checklist, then you can hire somebody who is far less technically competent, and they can create for you a completely consistent and profitable installation process. And then when they're done, they can update the checklist. Oh, well, we're on the next rev of this, and don't forget, do not install the latest version of Java. Make sure that we don't update that. Whatever it might be, if it's all in the checklist, it will get done. It will be done in the right order. It'll be done efficiently, and you don't have to pay a $60,000 or $80,000 engineer to do some very fundamental tasks. You can push that down to people who are entry level. So processes, procedures, and checklists. Memorize this screen and we'll use it. as the basis for what we discuss in the rest of this presentation. So I mentioned branding before. Another book, I'm not going to give you a bunch of reading, so this is the end of it, but another book that you should consider, and this is available on audio program, is a great little audio program. It's called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and he's got some really good videos on YouTube as well. And he talks about helping people understand why their job exists and what their role is in the big picture. And the reason that that's necessary and useful, even in a small business, is that people get in the habit of saying, oh, well, we have to do it this way because blah, blah, blah. And they literally make up stories, right? Every bad customer service experience that you've had is probably related to somebody making up a story about why they do something and not really understanding their job. So they'll say, oh, Verizon won't let us do that. Yes, they will. You don't have any idea what you're talking about. You're just saying that, so I'll shut up or get out of your space or because it's the only product you sell or whatever, right? People do the best they can, but if they don't understand why their job exists, why they are in that position, and where it fits in the big picture, then it's difficult for them to give the kind of high-level service that you need in a service business. So the behavior of people is part of your branding, and you don't want to give bad customer service by accident simply because people don't really know where their job fits in the big picture. And so always think about why your job exists. And for everybody in your company, entry-level techs, what role do they play in the profitability of your company? Senior level techs, administrative assistants, office managers, salespeople, everybody plays a role in your company or they wouldn't be there. Don't keep it from them. Don't keep it a secret from your employees of why their job exists and where it fits in the big picture. Help them understand that. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. You know, Monday morning meetings and that sort of thing will help you get this message across. So, checklists are awesome. Oh, I forgot. Yes, there is one more book. The Checklist Manifest Tool by Atul Gawande. So this guy is a medical doctor who developed a very short checklist that had a dramatic effect on helping reduce infections and surgeries all over the world. But he goes into discussions about why checklists are so dramatically effective. And one of the stories he tells, a great story, is about David Lee Roth and Van Halen. David Lee Roth is famous for having in his contract with the venues that they played, he had in the contract that there needed to be little bowls of M&Ms in the dressing room, in the green room, but there must be no brown M&Ms anywhere in the pile. And so there are some famous cases where he would trash a place because he found brown M&Ms, okay? Well, the truth is that when you ask him why you're being such a jerk about this, well, it's not about brown M&Ms. It's about the checklist. When Van Halen started touring, they put on these massive shows that required large amounts of electricity. They required some fireproofing. They required a very heavy stage, right? They had huge props and so forth. They required a great deal. And a lot of the venues they played were old and, they may not necessarily have been up to spec. So he put together a checklist that defined what they needed with regard to power and height and reinforcement and the weight of the stage and all that sort of stuff. And then he would bring in, truckloads full of equipment and set it up. Well, if he found brown M&Ms, he knew that in the middle of that very long checklist that he gave them, somebody was not paying attention. And if they missed the brown M&Ms, they probably missed a lot of safety precautions and other things. And Van Halen didn't want to be in the position of putting on a show that created a fire that killed people and gave them a bad name. So he would stop and make them go through the checklist from A to Z, every single item. because if they missed one thing, they probably missed another thing, right? So that's a great example of how checklists, even if other people don't understand why you're doing it, they can make sure that you maintain a high level of quality, even when you're dealing with people that you don't normally deal with in a different venue every time and under circumstances over which you have very little control. You can gain control to a certain extent if you have a checklist. My other example that I truly love is this is a photograph from NASA about how do you walk on the moon. If you want to walk on the moon successfully, you have a checklist strapped to your arm so that you know what you do first and what you do second. And you can see it's got little drawings in here. And if you go on NASA, you can find the photographs of these checklists. There are even places where they say, okay, you're going to look for a rock that looks like this, and you're going to tap it this way with the little hammer. And, think about how much it would suck to go all the way to the moon and back and forget to get a certain sample, right? You might just get yourself fired. So the way to do it when you're under pressure, under stress, hundreds of thousands of miles away from home, how do you make sure you do it? Well, you have a list and you tick through the list, and that's just the way it is, right? So every single thing. I mean, you've all heard about airplane pilots. They've got a checklist in order to take off, and large boats, cruise ships, they have the same thing, right? Well, obviously astronauts are that times 10, right? This is the way that you guarantee success, is you create for yourself a checklist. So I am a huge, huge, huge believer that you should have checklists, and you should get into what I call a checklist mentality that will allow you and everyone on your staff to be very successful and to constantly improve your processes and procedures. So the last item on every checklist is update the checklist, right? If something is for low-level techs, then it's going to have a lot of detail. So if you're going from version 7 to version 8, you need to put that in there. If you're doing something for high-level techs, then it's going to be a lot more general. It's going to say, open up port 499, but it's not going to necessarily have all the details about how you do that need to get revved. So you have much more detail when you're trying to create a checklist to pass work on to lower level technicians. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But you should have a checklist for everything. And obviously, you don't want to get overwhelmed, right? That's one of the messages. That's why the homework is about how to get started, to maybe pick 10 things that you're going to implement, and do one this week and do one next week, and implement them one at a time, because they don't do you any good if you don't implement them. So what do checklists do? They allow you to push the labor to lower level techs. They allow you to do something consistently even over time. So for example, we have very low volume for sales of hardware and software within the state of California. And so right now, we only have to do our sales tax reporting every quarter. Well, the result of that is I am very likely to forget completely how to do it. And I used to have this Excel spreadsheet that I would go in and fill it out and do these reports from QuickBooks. Well, now there's a different process where you do it all online. Okay, so that's cool. I still need to go. I need to know, where do I go? What's the username and the password? And which reports do I take out of QuickBooks? And which numbers do I look for in QuickBooks that gets translated over to the state of California's webpage, right? So there's a process and a procedure, and it's only 2 pages, but now I can just free up that memory space for something else. So over time, I can consistently do exactly the same thing on those reports, even though I only do them 4 times a year. So there is a Japanese philosophy called Kaizen, which is continuous incremental improvement. And it means that everybody on your team, everybody from top to bottom, is responsible for giving feedback to improve these checklists, right? Everybody is responsible for the long-term success of your company. And one of the things that happens when you go back and read that book, The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, he talks about you don't have to be a franchise, but if you act like a franchise, then you can begin to standardize everything you do. So you'll be able to, think about what franchises do. A lot of these fast food franchises, holy smokes, they take operations that have thousands of transactions a day worth tens or high tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they have those operations run by amateurs. The joke is always, oh, well, the manager at my favorite fast food place is the guy who's been there 2 weeks. Well, that very well may be the case, and that's possible because every single detail of that operation is documented. My daughter has worked at a couple of different subways, I think 3 different subways in 2 different states, and she talks about how they have a bucket that you buy, and it's got a line on the bucket that's determined by the number of square feet in your store. And then there's a soap packet size determined by the number of square feet in your store. And so it shows up, and you open the packet and you put it in the bucket and you fill it with water up to the line and you stir it. And now everybody can wash the floor at Subway because it is exactly the right amount of water and soap mixture so that you get a nice clean floor, but it's not too slippery and it's not impossible to rinse, and on and on and on. Somebody has figured it out. And then they documented it, and now every store does it exactly the same way. And so even moving from one store to another, it might be a different line on the bucket, and it might be a different size packet, but you put the packet in, you fill it up to the line, and you wash the floor. So having that kind of predictable success will just skyrocket your business to the next level. It literally frees up your brain to go do other things because service delivery has been taken care of. I love this quote by Horace Mann. Habit is a cable. We weave a thread of it each day, and at last we cannot break it. And that is true. Now, your bad habits are also a cable. So every day you need to unwind the thread of your bad habits. Just unwind one thread a day. You don't have to go cold turkey. But gradually get out of the habit of just doing the work without creating a service ticket. Get out of the habit of doing the work without charging the client. Get out of the habit of not documenting what you did. Get out of the habit of saying, I don't need to document this because I'm the owner, right? I'm the boss. You need to put yourself under the same restrictions as everybody who works for you. You need to document all your work. You need to have standardized processes, procedures, and you need to do the things that are going to make you successful, like all work is done off of a service request. We get prepaid for everything, and everybody has to put their notes into the system, right? You have to do all of those things. We prioritize everything from highest to lowest, oldest to newest, and that way we know that we can move very, very quickly, right? Those kinds of things are habits that are simply not going to come into existence by themselves. You have to do them. So, and then when you build not just the habits of you and your service manager and your leadership team, but everybody in the whole company, the habits of that group are your company culture. And you can literally have a culture of checklists, a culture of paying attention to the details, a culture of Kaizen and continuous incremental improvement. So who's responsible for this? Well, everybody is. And the goal is not necessarily that you're going to figure out 100% of everything. I always get this question. What happens? You can't know every instance. Like even now, after 20 years, I have clients who come up with stuff and I think, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before in my life. Like I could not have predicted this, which means I couldn't have had a process or a procedure in place for it, right? Well, so the goal isn't 100% documentation of processes and procedures and what might come up in the future. But I think it is legitimate to say that the goal is 90%. And when you've got a culture where you say, we document everything we do, we back up systems before we touch anything, we always have a path backward, we always minimize downtime, right? When you've got all of those things heavily entrenched into people and they've got checklists for all those things, then when they come up with something that they've never seen before and they've like no idea what to do, They look at it and say, okay, so I haven't seen this problem before, but here's what I know. I know that we go slow and are aware of our resources. I know that we document what we're doing. I know that I back up the configuration before I start making changes. I know that I only change one thing at a time, right? Tick, 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 tick. They've got ingrained in them the culture of how you provide customer service. And so they can, remember I said you were going to hire really good people, right? And have them do it your way. Well, when those really good people have been trained in your way, and now they're faced with this 10% of unknown, they figure out a way to provide service that's consistent with your brand, consistent with the way you do things, and probably very much the way you would have done it if you were in that situation, because you've got the system, you've got the branding, you've figured out how you operate, and you do necessarily execute things in a certain order and in a certain way. There is a brand, there's a way that you do business, and it might be very different from mine, but it's your way, and you can replicate that, and you can have your employees begin to think your way and act your way, even in that unknown category of 10% that we walk into on a regular basis. So there's different areas of SOPs for you to think about. And most of us are going to start at the bottom of this list. so I'm going to put it in the order you're least likely to work on them. First one is back office procedures. This is the most important. That's why it's at the top, to be honest with you. This is, you have to have procedures for invoicing. You have to have procedures for making sure that you get paid. You have to have procedures for marketing your business and running your business and making the ship move. And so that's your front office. And there's, dozens, if not hundreds of procedures that you could have in that category. Next is employee management. You should gradually over time, whenever you do anything with employees, begin to standardize it. When you bring employees on, do you just throw them in the bullpen and say, good luck, have a nice day? Or do you train them? Do you say, look, here's a shirt and an employee manual, and here's your paperwork for being hired, and here's an introduction to our remote management and monitoring system, here's an introduction to our PSA, here's how we deal with this, here's what you're expected to do and expected not to do, here's the equipment you're supposed to carry with you, right? There's a lot of stuff around that you just naturally do already, and I'm asking you to begin to write that down, to codify it, to hire each employee with the same process that you hired the last one, right? To have an introduction. And the other employees will be happy to help with this because they'll be like, man, I was thrown into the fire and I wish I'd have had more of an introduction. Okay, great. Help us create that introduction. Then there's running the service department. And this is, by running the department, I mean actually this is the job of the service manager to get the techs in line to create processes for success. How do you prioritize ticket? How do tickets move through your system? What are the statuses that you use? And what does that map look like that goes from new to acknowledged to in progress or scheduled, on hold maybe, waiting on parts, back to in progress. Eventually it gets completed and then it's verified and it gets closed. And at some point it's either invoiced or it is part of managed services and not invoiced. But once you have all those processes in place, then you can measure how many hours of labor it takes to execute a certain job and which employee is more billable than the other employees and so forth. You can figure out how you're making money within your business once you begin to measure things. If you don't measure things, you can never figure that out. You can just vaguely have a sense that you're making money or not making money, but you can't guarantee the profitability of a project, even if you do it 10 times, until you begin to measure what you're spending on labor, how much time it actually takes, how much you're charging, and so forth and so on. All of that becomes possible once you have appropriate processes within the service department. And finally, there's the one that you all want to do, which you probably have more documentation on this area than anything else, and that is the actual delivery of customer service. And that is, how do we configure firewalls? which ports do we open, which ports do we close, which patches and fixes and updates do we put in, which versions of software do we recommend, all the things that actually touch the client at the end of the day and deliver the actual service. That's all the processes and procedures within the delivery of service. So those are the categories that you need to address. And again, it's all about branding, right? You look at these brands and you know something about every name that's on that list, right? There's a hotel on there, DoubleTree by Hilton. You go into one of those, what do you get? You get a nice warm chocolate chip cookie, right? So if you haven't been to a DoubleTree and you're just driving down the street, literally pull into one, go up to the front desk and say, "Can I have a warm chocolate chip cookie?" They will give you one, right? It's their deal. That's part of their shtick, right? Every DoubleTree, everywhere in the world, they give you warm cookies, right? So every one of these places has standard operating procedures that allows them to not only deliver service, but to sell the entire operation in a bundle and make money knowing that they will be profitable. If you open a Great Clips, you will make money if you follow their standard operating procedures, right? And you don't have to join a franchise. You don't have to be a franchise. The whole point is you create processes, you act that way and standardize your stuff, and now you can replicate your success again and again and again. So remember that it's all about branding, right? And branding is everybody's job. So remember that 90%, we want to get to 90% documentation of our processes and procedures, and then everybody in your company can help contribute to the long-term success of the organization as a whole. So I've got this set of books that is available. It's 1,100 pages, 4 volumes, hundreds of standard operating procedures, available in paperback or Kindle or PDF or whatever makes you happy. And if you go to smbooks.com and put in the code WEB10, you'll get 10% off your entire order, this book and all the other books. Now, this set is more than just a set of books. To be honest with you, this is a manual on how to run a managed service business. This is a complete way of doing business in a box. So it is not cheap. These are not $10 books. The price on the website is $279.95. But this is guaranteed to save you at least 2 or 3 hours and probably thousands of hours in the first year if you implement these processes. So I encourage you to go take a look at it. If you go to smbooks.com, you'll see a place where you can link to a web page where you can get copies of the table of contents and so forth. So take a look at it. I encourage you to give it a try. I pretty much guarantee that if you have any effort at all in the process, you will save hundreds of times the cost of this book. So please take a look at it, and I appreciate that. Or if you want to start at the beginning at very, very entry level, managed services in a month is only 25 bucks. Again, that's available as an audio book or a PDF or whatever. And then service agreements for SMB consultants. All of these books include lots and lots and lots of download material that accompanies them. Service agreements for SMB consultants includes 3 different kinds of contracts plus lots of other stuff in the download format. So again, go to smbooks.com, put in the code WEB10, and you'll save 10% off your entire order. And we have all kinds of other stuff there. So poke around, and I really appreciate that. That is it for this webinar. I appreciate your attention. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in down below, and we're kind of out of time here, but I promise I will email you the answers to those, and I will blog about the particularly good, juicy questions that I get. So thank you for your time, and that will conclude this broadcast.